The nurse cared for a blind elderly woman. One day she arrived earlier and was shocked by what the old woman's son did to her. The sun had not yet fully risen. When Martha arrived at the villa mansion, her hesitant steps stopped in front of the imposing gates as she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, trying to ignore the weight of the unease that consumed her. Before she could ring the bell, the muffled scream cut through the morning silence. "Please, son, don't do this," the anguished voice echoed. From one of the upper windows, Martha felt her blood freeze in her veins. "Help me, Venita," she whispered, making the sign of the cross as her hands trembled. The door opened abruptly, revealing Henry, a man with a severe expression and eyes that seemed to harbor dark secrets. "So you're the new nurse," he said, his tone leaden with disdain. "We've lost 3 this year already. I hope you last longer than the others." His cold smile made Martha feel as if a chill surrounded her. She swallowed hard before responding. "I'm Martha, and I intend to take good care of Mrs. Nora, no matter what happens." A pregnant woman appeared behind Henry, her hesitant steps and downcast gaze revealing a fear she unsuccessfully tried to hide. "This is Lydia, my wife." Henry introduced her without looking at her. Lydia briefly raised her eyes, meeting Martha's, and in that brief moment a silent message of despair seemed to pass between them. "Welcome." Lydia whispered, her hands instinctively protected in her belly. "I hope you know what you're doing." "Come in," Henry ordered, "and remember, in this house there are matters that are none of your business." The last nurse who poked her nose where she shouldn't. He left this sentence hanging, but the threat was as clear as crystal. It was then that Isabel descended the stairs, her presence bringing a brief moment of relief to the suffocating tension. "Welcome, Miss Jenkins," said Isabel, her eyes revealing deep concern. This house harbors secrets that need to come to light. My sister needs more than just medical care." Henry shot Isabel a sharp look. "Be careful with your words, Aunt. You know very well what happens to those who try to interfere in our family's affairs." Isabel lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, I know, just as I know that one day you will have to answer for everything you've done." Henry, "God sees and hears everything. No one can hide from him." The ensuing silence was interrupted by the arrival of Donna Nora, leaning on her cane. Her time-worn face carried scars deeper than the visible ones. "Mother," Henry shot coldly, "you insist on walking alone. Do you want to fall again?" Nora raised her face, her blind eyes seeming to see beyond appearances. "The fools that hurt me the most, son, are not the ones that leave marks on the body, but the ones that destroy the soul." The tension in the air grew even thicker after Nora's words. Henry advanced towards his mother, his heavy steps echoing through the hall like distant thunder. "How you talk too much for someone who depends so much on others," he snarled, grabbing Nora's arm forcefully. It was then that Martha, moved by a protective impulse, stepped forward. "Please, Mr. Villa, let me help Don Nora. That's what I'm here for." Isabella took advantage of Martha's intervention to approach her sister. "Nora, it is right, Henry. Ever since your father died in that accident, you've changed. What happened to that boy who used to kiss his mother's hands every morning?" Isabel's words made Lydia let out a muffled sob, her hands trembling as she caressed her prominent belly. "Please, let's not talk about that now," she pleaded, casting a frightened look at her husband. Henry released his mother's arm abruptly, turning to face Isabella. "You have no right to talk about my father, not after everything you did, not after trying to turn his mind against me." His voice thundered through the hall, making Lydia shrink even more. "Get out of this house now, or I swear you'll regret being born a Villa son." Nora's voice trembled. "Your anger is consuming you like a poison. Ever since your father died, ever since the will." Before she could finish, Henry interrupted her with a shout. "Enough. You lost the right to talk about inheritance when you decided to change everything behind our backs. This house is mine now, and everyone here will learn to respect that." Before being practically pushed out, Isabel managed to approach Martha and whisper in her ear, "Protect my sister, girl. There are things happening in this house that even the dead cannot forgive. My brother-in-law's accident, it wasn't an accident. And Nora, she didn't go blind from illness. Be careful, the walls have ears, and Henry has eyes in every corner." The chill that ran through Martha's body was like a warning from fate. She watched Lydia hurry up the stairs, one protective hand over her bell, while Henry remained in the hall, his dominating presence filling the environment with a silent threat. "Now, nurse," he said, his falsely cordial tone barely hiding the underlying threat, "I'll show you to my mother's room, and remember, too much curiosity can be fatal." In this house, Martha followed Henry up the stairs, each step seeming to lead her deeper into a mystery that was beginning to reveal itself as much darker than she had imagined. Via Bell's words echoed in her mind like an omen as she watched Henry's rigid back in front of her. "My God," she prayed silently, "give me strength to uncover the truth and protect those who need help in this house." Upon arriving at Nora's room, Martha found the elderly woman sitting on the edge of the bed, her trembling fingers gently passing over an ancient rosary. The atmosphere was heavy with shadows, even with the morning light trying to penetrate through the heavy velvet curtains. Henry remained at the door, his watchful eyes following every movement of the nurse. "You have 15 minutes to examine her. After that, I want a full report on her condition," he ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a razor. "A proper diagnosis requires more time, Mr. Villa," Martha responded, gathering courage she didn't know she possessed. "Furthermore, I will need privacy with your mother," to Henry interrupted her with a dry, threatening laugh. "Privacy? There is no such thing in this house, Miss Jenkins. My mother has already caused too much trouble with her moments of privacy." He approached Nora, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Isn't that right, mother? Like that night when you decided to rewrite the will?" Nora shuddered under her son's touch, but her voice came out surprisingly firm. "Every decision I made was for the good of the family, Henry. If your father were alive—" Her words were cut off by a tighter grip on her shoulder. "But he's not, is he? And we know exactly why." The veiled threat in Henry's voice made Martha shiver. That's when Lydia appeared at the door, her pale face marked by recent tears. "Henry, please," the doctor called. He needs to speak with you about the baby's tests." Her voice trembled as she mentioned the child, and Martha noticed how her hands instinctively protected her belly. Something in her gaze seemed to scream for help. Henry released his mother's shoulder abruptly. "Take care of her," he ordered Martha, "but remember, anything suspicious she says or does, I want to know immediately before leaving." He leaned over Nora. "And you, mother, don't forget our agreement. Your blindness could get much worse if your tongue remains loose." As soon as Henry left, Nora let out a stifled "so be." Martha quickly approached, noticing for the first time the purple bruises on the elderly woman's arms. "Mrs. Nora," she whispered, "these injuries, they're not from falls, are they?" The lady turned her face in her direction, and even through the lifeless eyes, Martha felt the weight of a terrible truth. "My child," Nora spoke softly, her hand seeking Martha's, "there are things in this house that not even the devil would be capable of forgiving. My son, my Henry, since his father's death, he has turned into something a mother cannot recognize, and my blindness," she hesitated, her voice trembling, "let's just say some people need to lose their sight to stay alive." Martha felt her heart tighten as she witnessed Nora's silent suffering. The bruises on the elderly woman's arms told a story that went far beyond simple household accidents. Each purple mark was like a page from a horror book that this family tried to hide. The nurse could no longer pretend not to see what was happening, and even knowing she could lose her job or worse, she decided to confront the situation. "Mrs. Nora, I can no longer pretend I don't see what's going on." Martha began, her voice shaking with contained emotion. "These injuries, the way your son treats you, this is criminal. He needs to be arrested. No one has the right to do this to their own mother. It's inhumane." She was interrupted by an anguished scream that echoed through the room. "Arrested? No." Nora's voice came loaded with a despair that only a mother could understand. "Please don't say that. He is my son, my boy." Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the rosary between her fingers. "You don't understand, Martha. No one understands Henry. He wasn't always like this. After his father died, something changed inside him, as if a shadow had taken over his soul." Martha knelt before the elderly woman, taking her hands in hers. "But Mrs. Nora, you can't keep living like this. These injuries, this constant fear." The nurse stopped speaking when she saw tears streaming from her patient's sightless eyes. "Let's talk about something else, please," Nora begged, trying to force a smile that looked more like a mask of pain. "Tell me about you, Martha. Do you have a family? Are you married?" The abrupt change of subject was a silent plea to end that topic, but it also revealed the deep fear that consumed her at that moment. Lydia entered the room silently. Closing the door behind her, her face was marked by recent tears, and her hands trembled as she caressed her prominent belly. Mrs. Nora, she whispered, I brought you some tea, but her eyes told another story, a story of shared fear and painful secrets. Lydia Mika, Nora extended her hand in the direction of her daughter-in-law's voice. Come sit here with us. How is my grandchild? There was a tenderness in her voice that contrasted painfully with the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. Have to tell you him he's fine, Lydia replied, her voice choked. But sometimes I'm so afraid. She sat on the edge of the bed, and Martha noticed how her hands trembled as she placed the teacup on the nightstand. Afraid that he will grow up in this house, afraid that he will see. Nora interrupted her gently. We should not speak of such things. The walls. She did not complete the sentence, but it was not necessary. Isabel's warning echoed in Martha's mind. The walls have ears. Martha observed the two women united in their silent fear and felt a determination grow in her chest. I need to step out for a moment, she announced, rising. There are some medications I need to get to help with these injuries. Nora's face contorted in panic. No, please, there's no need. I've already said they were just accidents. You know how us old folks are. We get hurt easily. Her voice trembled, revealing the fear behind the rehearsed words. But Donna, Nora, Martha insisted. Gently, as your nurse, I cannot ignore